Hello, everyone, and welcome to our amazing, exciting celebration of this book, This Appearing House by the fabulous Ally Malinenko. And big welcome to Ally. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is fantastic.
I'm excited that you have bats like flying out of your head because I always
I know,
wanted
right?
that. And yeah, and now you have it. But let's do a little quick round of introductions. We have some friends from the spooky middle grade crew here. So let's find out who's here. And also, I see we have some people out there watching. So if you have comments, get those down there. Get your questions in the comments, and we'll get ready to answer all of your burning questions. But let's see, Erin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hi, I'm so excited to be here tonight. My name is Erin Petti. I'm the author of The Peculiar Haunting of Thelma B and the soon-to-be released sequel, Thelma B in Toil and Trouble. And I am a This Appearing House super fan. I don't know if there is an official group yet, or maybe just like the application time is like long. But I'm going to hear about that soon. I want to be the president of the fan club. And
Job is yours.
I'm so excited to be here, Ally, with you tonight. And yeah, I'll pass it along to Lorien.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lorien Lawrence. I am also a super fan. So I'd like to be the VP if that position is available. I write the Fright Watch series. The third one comes out the 30th of August, which is, I don't know, very soon. And I'm very excited to help Ally celebrate. Kim?
Yeah, me too. I was just showing off Lorien's book, which is also amazing and coming out soon. But yes, I will absolutely. I'm in for the fan club. So let me know when we have our next meeting. I'm totally ready. But I'm Kim Ventrella, author of various books for middle grade readers and creator of this cool little skeleton top hat. So that's a fun fact. But really, of course, we're here to talk about Ally. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and just like I can see there's so many people that are excited to join you here tonight. So just give us a little lowdown on who is Ally Malinenko.
Oh, who's to say? So I'm Ally. Hi, everybody. I am the author of Ghost Girl and This Appearing House, that's the one that just came out. I write spooky middle grade. That's my favorite. Those are my favorite books growing up. So it's my favorite thing to write now. This Appearing House is the story of Jack and her best friend Hazel. When we meet Jack, she's at a 5-year anniversary of a cancer diagnosis, and she's declared NED, which stands for no evidence of disease. So she's okay, but she's grappling with a lot of anxiety. Mainly because she's starting to have things that she starts to think are symptoms. So she has a fall off of her bike. She's worried that her hands are shaking. All of these little symptoms, are popping up. And the biggest one being that at the cul-de-sac where she rides her bike, all of a sudden there's a house that used to not be there, and it seems to have appeared out of nowhere. So she becomes a little obsessed with the house. She convinces her best friend Hazel to go out and see it, because her feeling is if Hazel can see the house, then she's okay, because then the house is really definitely for sure there. While they're there discussing it, these neighborhood boys come by and they bully them a little bit, and they dare them to go into the house. And once they go into the house, they discover that they can't leave. And then the house, as they move from like one terrifying room to another, the house starts to become sentient. It starts to speak to Jack, and it reveals itself to be there for a very specific reason that is absolutely about her. And it's just like thematically, the lesson that she starts to understand is that the only way she's going to get out is if she goes all the way through. And that's This Appearing House.
I love it. It's like a very personal, I feel like, unique haunted house story. And in the beginning, so you have a great dear reader, if you haven't got your copy yet, where you kind of talk about your like the personal side of the story. And you say that the haunted house has always been a metaphor for a diseased mind. But for me, it wasn't my mind that trapped me. It was my body. And so you're kind of taking this interesting look at the haunted house. So do you want to talk about that a little bit more? Like, did you
Sure.
come up with haunted house stories, and how did you find your way into like making it something that was so personal?
So just for the background, I was diagnosed with cancer in 2014. I had a number of surgeries, I had radiation, and I've been on medication since then. Also have been NED, just like Jack. But obviously that was, a huge thing to go through. And, while I wrote a poetry book about it called Better Luck Next Year. And I really feel like I feel like I dealt with a lot of that, and so I put it aside, because I wrote that a while ago. And after I finished Ghost Girl, I was thinking to myself, that I love haunted houses. I'm a big Shirley Jackson fan. So I really wanted to write a haunted house story. And I was coming up with all these different reasons. And it's like, the thing about haunted houses is usually like economic horror. It's like they have to stay in the house because they bought it and they can't afford to leave. Because otherwise it's like, why would you stay there? Just go, run away. It's full of ghosts. Get out. So I was like, okay, well, if I don't want to go down that route, what would be another reason that she wouldn't be able to leave the house? And that's when I started thinking about it as a metaphor for a body. And that the idea being that she has to physically go into it to prove that it's real, therefore to make that so that she knows she's okay. But then she can't leave until she deals with all of the demons that have been haunting her in this house. So, I mean, I don't think I sat down and was like, oh, I'm going to write a cancer story. And I also, just for the record, like it's on the jacket, so it's not a surprise, but the word is only used once in the book because for me, this story is about trauma and the elasticity of trauma. And I wanted it to be something that like any kid who's been through any kind of trauma. So like maybe they were sick, maybe they were abused, maybe they have friends who were, maybe they have a parent who was. Any kid who's been through any kind of trauma can see themselves in this story. Like that's really what I was shooting for. I don't know whether or not I accomplished it, but that was the goal. Like I didn't want it just to be, like this is for kids who have had this one very specific experience, and I'm a big believer in the idea that books are windows and mirrors. So I wanted it to be a mirror for kids who have struggled in their lives. And I want it to be a window for kids who haven't, to understand what their friends have been through and to also understand that someday they're going to go through something, because we all do at some point, and I think that's also one of the things I love about horror is that it kind of teaches you how to deal with the monsters that will inevitably show up in your life. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that too, how you constantly refer to it as like everything that she's been through or everything that's happened. Like, she never uses the word cancer. And like partly you feel like that's because people in her life kind of want to gloss over it and like pretend like we're not going to like broach the topic. But then I like that idea too, that you're also trying to kind of make it so it's this more universal like experience of going through trauma. So there's kind of like two different reasons for.
Yeah. And I mean, her mother uses that term a lot because her mother also has trauma that she hasn't dealt with from what she went through with her, you find out that your daughter is ill, like she has things that she hasn't worked through. And her way of doing that is just to be like, everything's fine. It's over. You're fine. You're fine. Until one day she starts to think she's not fine. And then mom goes into panic mode, So, but yeah. And it was also just to make it so it wasn't. So when the mom calls it everything you went through, I feel like that could be a filler for anyone reading it for anything that they also went through. Yeah. So yeah, that was on purpose.
Yeah, I love that. I love it. And I do have 1,000 more questions. However, I just want to remind people, if you have a question for Ally, get that in the chat. And I also want to give our amazing spooky friends, Erin and Lorien, a chance to ask your burning questions. So let me turn it over your way.
I would love to just kind of pick up on that. And this is like me wearing my 7th grade English teacher hat. Like I want to teach this book. There's that level of it, like that emotionality, kids being brave, like, but then I love that you said Shirley Jackson because like, I mean, love Shirley Jackson.
She's the queen.
Yeah. But like, her metaphors, allegory, all of those like, English teachery, figurative language, literary devices, like what if teaching kids those terms in like that kind of craft through a horror novel is gonna grip them way more than if I'm like, let's bust out some Steinbeck or something. That honestly used to be on my my school's required reading list was a bit Steinbeck. We got rid of that, but like I don't know. I am a nerd about craft, and I love hearing authors talk about craft. And there's so many layers to this story. Can you talk about your relationship or your process and like all these metaphors? Like it sounds like it was really on your mind, like it was intentional. But can you talk us through like those layers and what kind of your process was in attacking that?
Sure. So I knew that I feel like I would like once I realized it was going to be a haunted house story, I was like, oh man, this is going to be perfect. This is easy. You go room to room, and in each room you encounter something that is specific to Jack's experience, but also a horror trope of some sort. So you've got ghosts, you've got the creature that's the mourner, you've got the monster, the unnamed monster at the end. And I wanted each of those things to tie back to Jack's experience or to represent aspects of her life. So, like, who would the mourner represent? Who is the wailing woman? Who is the person that's constantly crying and chasing her through the house? And so I knew that I wanted to tie it back to the aspects of her real life. So using the dimensions of the house just made it really easy to do that, because it was like we started off small. Like in fact, the mourner grows inside as she goes through the house. She grows in size. She becomes bigger. She starts off very small. She's almost like a little, like you just see this gray creature behind her refrigerator. And by the time you get to the end, it's a full grown person. And that was also intentional because I wanted it to start off unsettling. And then the moment that Jack starts to realize that everything that's happening is about her, I wanted like that reveal to be like, for her to have this moment where she has to understand that if she doesn't confront everything she has been ignoring for all these years, like she's locked herself in this haunted house and she will never ever get out. Like that's the whole point, because if you don't, like there's a section in the book where she has a conversation and the one of the creatures in the house tells her that she built these walls to keep the monsters out, but instead she locked herself in with them. And I think that is just the way I think about trauma too, is that if you don't recognize it and name it and stop and tell yourself like, this is what's happening, this is the elasticity of trauma, like you just wall yourself up with the monsters that you're not dealing with. So I just feel like the house was a really good, like just a very easy way to talk about trauma, which I think, I mean, I'm not the first person to do that, obviously. Like that's what like all haunted houses stories are, really. It's just that usually it's like I said in the Dear Reader, it's usually like a symptom of a diseased mind. And with mine, I was like, well, it'll be a diseased body, because that's also a thing that Jack is trapped in. She's trapped in her body in the way that she's trapped in the house. So I feel like it just worked as a good parallel.
It definitely works.
Yeah, I love that. And that kind of plays into a question that we had from Cindy, who asked, how did you want this book to be different from other books about trauma or illness?
Great question. Thank you, Cindy. So I am not a fan of The Fault in Our Stars.
So, same, and I thank you for saying that.
Yeah, I'm not, and I didn't read it for a very long time because I had a feeling, knowing its genesis, knowing that this was someone else's story that he told. I kind of knew, I was like, it's probably not for you. You know what? After I got my diagnosis, I was like, don't do it. It's not for you. And then years later, I'll be honest, I hate read it. I read it knowing I wasn't going to like it, and I didn't. And there were so many things in it that just felt so inauthentic. One of the main things being that the main character in that, she doesn't know what medication she's on. And all I could think about is how unrealistic that is. Like, there's just absolutely no way she wouldn't know what her medical routine is. She does it every day. And it really just kind of just screamed of someone who is just playing around in what illness is like and has never really personally dealt with it. Because I think a lot of those stories are like that. In fact, Jack has a moment in my book where she talks about how, every story that she's ever read about a kid who gets sick, like the kid gets sick and everybody worries, and then the kid dies and everybody's like, wow, I really appreciate life now. Like, I didn't appreciate life before, but now my friend is dead and I appreciate life. And she says there's no books about the kids who lived. Like, there's no books about the kids who have gone all the way to the precipice, who have stood at the edge of the abyss and turned around and walked away. Like, they don't write those books. So that's me talking in that moment. So for me, I wanted to write a book. I wanted to write a book about what it's like to be told that you are probably dying and then to not, and what that means and how you carry that for the rest of your life, and what it feels like to not have to think about it, So I guess most of the books that I've read on illness have all been of the earlier ilk. The character dies and everyone's like, life is short and beautiful and hug your friends and touch grass and all of that stuff. And I wanted to tell basically the exact opposite of that story.
Yeah, I love that. And that's a great question, Cindy. That was one of my favorite parts. On page 9, you talk about she'd read the books. The stories were always the same. Kid got sick. Everyone felt bad. Kid taught everyone to love in a deeper, more meaningful way. Kid died. Everyone remembered Kid as a hero. That was the only story she'd ever known. She'd never read about a kid who'd gone through what she had lived. They didn't write stories about those kids. So I love that you kind of sum it up perfectly there. And great question. And another question came in from R. Berg. And I guess we're looking behind you. It's fun to study the things like in people's backgrounds. So is that your writing closet? And what is your next book going to be about?
So Rob, I have upgraded, my friend. I have a whole room. I'm very fancy now. So he's asking that because I used to write in a walk-in closet that basically fit my desk and had one light, and that was it, because I only had a 1-bedroom apartment. So now I have a bigger apartment. So now I have a whole room to myself in the morning at 4:45 when I can't think what to write. I can stare out my window. It's great. So my next book has been a little bit of a struggle. So we're still working on that one, but it's a witch story. And it's, as I said in another podcast I did, there is no universe in which I would write a story about witches and they would be the bad guys. So this is about a family of young girls who know that they are witches. They're going to grow up to be witches. Their mom is like the main witch in the village. And they live the kind of life that witches live, which is that when the villagers need you, when the baby's choked on a chicken bone, or when you're, then you're everybody's hero. And when they don't, they just don't trust you. So that story is something that I'm working on right now. And it involves some shapeshifters and a little bit of winks at Salem, because you have to. And it's a story about girls discovering that they've always had the magic that they need in life inside them the whole time. And it's about family, very much so. And it's about sisterhood. And I'm really excited. I'm still rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic right now. We haven't sunk yet, but we're going to make it happen. We're all getting in the lifeboat at some point.
That's the best description of writing I've ever heard. I'm just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Yes, that's so true. Great question. And let me turn it over to Erin. I know you've been waiting and biding your time, and here you are, the president of the Disappearing House fan club.
And it feels like a lot of responsibility, but I also feel like I'm up to the task. You know what I mean? I feel like I'm here for it. So Ally, I can't get enough of what you've done here. And something that I'm kind of interested in. Okay, get it together, Erin. You're the president.
Madam President.
So
Madam President.
The idea that you have to go through it. One of the things that I wonder about is the way that you thread the needle here, because it's a book that teaches a lesson, very, very much so. And it is a excellent book that has fabulous writing, that tells an amazing story, that happens to teach a lesson. You know what I mean? I think we've all read books where you know from page one that the author has an opinion about something, and you're going to get a full portrait of what that opinion is. And I love, like with this, I'm curious because in the lesson being so vital and so important, and also how someone could, how a 10-year-old could read this and love this scary story just to pieces and not really put their finger exactly on the nose of it. But maybe when that, maybe it's like, it's going to reiterate, right? Like we learn things in iterations, and maybe you're just laying a ground layer of understanding about, you know, facing your fears and walking through fire, and, you know, not steering so hard against the pain that you cause yourself more pain. You know what I mean?
Love
so
that.
you have this thing going on where, like, it's definitely a message inside the book. A kid could definitely read it and not put their finger on exactly the message. How did that happen? Did that feel like that happened in the first draft, or did you have an editorial process where your editor was like, okay, here's how we're going to sculpt this so we strike the right balance, and then you guys kind of went back and forth? So basically, you've done something outstanding, which I've seen very, very few times in reading middle grade, I think, in reading period. I'm crazy about this book, and I'm wondering, like, was it something that, I mean, that they literally, I'm an elected official at this point, but like, did that happen kind of like all at once, or like how? Or was it more of kind of like putting puzzle pieces together and taking things out and putting them back in?
Okay, that's a great question. I feel like it's a little bit of both, but I think the important thing before we have this conversation is that, you know, I explain how this book came to be, because this book wasn't ever supposed to be a book. Like, I wrote this book for me. I wrote what I needed to hear, which is why, yes, there's definitely a lesson. It's the lesson that I learned through everything I went through. So I wrote this book because I felt like I needed to exercise some demons. I didn't write it and be like, okay, like this is going to be my next middle grade book, because at the time I didn't even have a first middle grade book. So like Ghost Girl wasn't even accepted. We were on submission. I just was like, you have to keep yourself busy and not think about being on submission. So let's write another story. And when it's slowly, as it came through the first draft, was clearly, I was writing about my experiences. I was like, okay, well, this is just going to be an exercise for you, you know, and maybe what you'll take out of it is that you'll become a better writer, or you'll have worked through some things, you know, that, you know, you probably need a therapist for, whatever. And that was where I had left it. And then I got to the end and I was like, you know, I really do kind of like it though. I really do kind of like it. And I gave it to my very good friend, Amber. And I was like, you know, Amber, will you take a look at this and just, I don't know, let me know what you think. Cause I don't know if it's like a thing, but I gave it to, she's like, yeah, I'll take a read. Absolutely. Cause Amber's wonderful like that. And at that point, you know, I remember saying to myself, if it's only ever a Microsoft Word document file on your computer, that's okay. Like, that's okay. And I was very much in that place where, like, if that's all it's going to be, you know, not all writing is meant for everyone. Like, sometimes we just write things for ourselves. And I was like, this might just be a thing you wrote for yourself. And that's fine. You know, you still be proud of it. It just doesn't have to belong to everyone. And then Amber came back and very enthusiastically convinced me to share this with our agent. We share an agent. And I sent it to my agent, and she also felt very good about it. She had a very strong reaction to this manuscript. And then we gave it to my editor, and they bought it, obviously, because it's a book. And I think at that point, that's where, like, the second part. So when you ask me, like, did I intentionally set out to have a lesson. Like, yes, because that was when it was just for me. That was when I was just laying down, like, this is what I went through, and this is what I took away from it, and this is what I'm going to carry going forward. But then when it was going to be for other people, I was like, uh-oh, you know, and it was really important to me, and it was really important to my editor, that it does exactly what you said, Erin, that for the kids who see the deeper story, cool. But for the kids who just want a scary story, that's what I wanted to deliver. Like, that was very important to me. And I mean, hopefully that's how it worked out. I mean, I hope that, like, there are kids who will read it who will just be like, wow, that house was crazy. Like, the end, chuck the book, move on to the next one. Like, that's a delight. That would make me so happy. But if there are kids out there who are like, huh, or if you, like you said, at a later point, they're like, huh, you know, there was something in that book, you know, that's amazing. If it works on both levels, it does. You know, I had a chat recently with our mutual friend, Laura Semp, who wrote the Clackety. And I feel like our two books actually kind of are in conversation a little bit, because in her book, like, mine is dealing with, like, the trauma of an illness, and hers is dealing with anxiety. And her character goes through an incredible adventure, but while doing so also learns how to manage panic attacks and her anxiety. And there's a growth there. And I remember speaking to Laura about it. We were on a podcast recently, and she said the exact same thing. She said, you know, for the kids who need that, it's there. But ultimately, I just wanted to write a good, scary story, because who doesn't love a scary story? So I guess that's my answer. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. I mean, it's because the balance is so expertly struck. I mean, like, it's just like that it made me so curious. So thank you for sharing that, like, what the process was, because I was just, I'm like, man, how'd you strike this balance? So.
I mean, my editor did a really great job. In earlier iterations of the book, when she first gets into the house, she is kind of told, like, the rules and what she has to do to get out. She's got to find her cabinet. She's told that, like, point blank, like, right off the bat. And my editor was like, let's just tease it out a little bit. Let's just, like, from room to room, let her see clues that are like, oh, is that a hospital bed? And, oh, what does that sound like, the MRI machine? You know, just these little moments where she's starting to think that this is for her. And that it's something that, you know, she's in there with her friend that she can't talk about either. She's not capable. She doesn't have the language to talk about it, because her and her mom don't have the language to talk about it. So my amazing editor did a phenomenal job. And when we made that shift where, like, she doesn't meet Mr. Nobody right at the beginning, she meets him later and finds out about the whole quest part of the book, I feel like that was a perfect setup, that we were already, like, invested, and she was already, like, halfway to figuring out what was happening here. And that was 100% my editor. She was just like, let's take it a little slower. And yeah.
I love that. And it sounds like the editing process has been, like, really smooth and really helped you kind of bring it out. Like, your editor just kind of understood, like, okay, this is what you're going for, and helped you, like, tease it out a little bit. I feel like that's the perfect way for that to work.
Yeah. Sarah was, I mean, my editor hit the ground running with this book, and it was, you know, she was so wonderful too, because she was like, I see what you're doing, and I know how personal it is to you, and I want to, like, and she's a very gentle editor anyway. All of her line notes are, like, the sweetest. I can't imagine working with someone who is just like, cut this, lose that, what is this? I would cry. I would open my draft and cry every day. I'm too sensitive for that. I can't handle it. But Sarah is just so perfect. She's like, I love what's happening here. What if we did a little more of this? And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, fun idea. Let's do it. So she definitely, you know, really respected that. She knew that this was a very personal story. And to make it work for everyone, though, we had to keep that balance. And she was phenomenal about walking me through that process. Like, I'm really blessed. Like, she's been amazing to work with. And I hope we continue.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I love it. And so we had, let's see, you kind of covered this one. You told us all about your witch book. But so in the process of like this witch book, is this something where like, do you ever kind of have a back and forth either with your editor or your agent about a book kind of in those early beginning stages, or do you like to keep it secret to yourself? I know we have another spooky friend, Jacqueline West, who like at least in the early days, always kept her books secret and never even told anyone she was writing them until she was totally finished. So how do you feel about like sharing and working with people in the early stages?
So I feel like I'm not the kind of person who can just be like, oh, this is my idea, here's the outline or like the synopsis, because I'm a terrible pantser, because I'm awful at plotting, because I like to torture myself and write books 17 times over and over again before I figure out what I'm doing. So what usually winds up happening, so what happened with the Ghost Girl and with Disappearing House is I wrote the whole book. Like I just wrote the whole book and then they saw it, when we got there. With the witch book, between edits on both Ghost Girl and Disappearing House and just like some life stuff, I just didn't get a whole book written. And my editor was like, what you got? And I was like, well, I got not a whole book. That's what I got. So we did like a synopsis, and that is what we've been going back and forth with, tinkering. We've been like trying different timelines and like different stories. And then we moved in one direction, like far into like, we're going to make it modern, like really modern, like a practical magic kind of thing. And then I tried to write that and I was like, this is not working for me. So now we've pivoted back into like a dark fantasy. So we were going back and forth for a while, and I reached a point where we had a little meeting, my editor, my agent, and I was like, you know what? I think I'm not good at writing an outline. I'm not good at explaining to you. Thanks, Amber. I'm not good at explaining what the book is going to be because I haven't fully written it. So I just need to write the book. So I'm just going to sit down. So that's about where I am right now. Like, what I usually do is I can't start a book without an opening and ending and one like major pivotal middle scene. Everything else is just kind of like, hey, what do you want to do today? Like, where's it going today? Like, what if we just, I don't know, throw some ghosts in there today, see what happens. So I just think I need to get back to that place because the whole writing an outline thing was just, it wasn't working. And Sarah's like, I can see that you're trying. And I'm like, I just need to write the book, whatever it's going to be and however long it's going to take. So
okay, I love that we're like the same person right now, because first of all, writing for us is like writing on the deck of the Titanic. Yes, I write everything 17 times. And the hardest book I ever wrote was the one I sold on proposal, where I hadn't read the whole book yet. I just written the first like 30 pages.
Right.
Nope, because I'm like you, like I need to experiment with like a bunch of different versions before I land on the right one. So if you've already sold it, oh, that's tough.
I also am not good at like switching gears. So like if I have something that I'm doing and I'm like, this is the direction I'm going in. And then like, my agent or my editor are like, no, try this. I'm like, no, I can't do that. We're doing this. We're going this way. I can't go this way. I've already gone this way. The wheels are pointed this way. I mean, eventually I can turn it around, but like it takes me a while to like start thinking of it in a new way. Like it's just, the story is the story. So, yeah, but it's a fun process, Kim. I'm glad we share that with each other. We can be miserable together.
Yes, exactly. Well, misery loves company, so we have some great company. But let's see. We have a question for everyone. Were you ever hesitant to include something personal in your story? Ooh. If so, how did you overcome it?
I love this.
Interesting. Let's see. Who should we put on the spot here? Lorien, I feel like we haven't heard from you in a while. So Lorien, tell me about that time that you put on a mask and you turned into a swamp monster at the middle school dance, because I need to know.
It was yesterday, yesterday, last night. And I had to keep myself muted. My dogs were having a tantrum and I was like, please don't, like a kid in school, please don't call on me yet, because you're just going to hear my two dogs barking like crazy. I turned into a monster yesterday and it was fine. No, the Stitchers and the Collectors is focused on grief. I had lost my dad when I wrote those books, and Unmasked is about an anxiety disorder, which I also have. And so I feel like when you rip off the Band-Aid with the first one and you add that personal, I think horror, like, I mean, Ally, you were talking about this, well, like way more eloquently than I'm going to right now, but like that horror, using horror as a metaphor for things that you're going through in your life and those monsters, and that is very, very, very near and dear to me. And so I feel like I was a little hesitant with the Stitchers to put myself in, because I'm like, who's going to care about this and whatever. But I feel like now I'm like, bring it on. These are always going to be about me. Just kidding. But yeah, it helps. Like, it can be therapeutic for the author, and as a teacher, kids need it. And horror is a beautiful gateway into reading in general. And it helps them to get those layers in that, Ally, you were talking about before, with that balance. Yeah. So I'm going to just keep doing it.
Yes.
Till I get out all my issues.
I love that. Erin, president of the Ally Malinenko fan club. What about you?
I mean, that I love what you said, Lorien, but it's like this kind of half jokingly, but you're absolutely right? These are all about me. Like, all these stories, all these books are about us. I don't know if this is ridiculous. If anyone watches Westworld, there's this concept that was recently on an episode where, like, one of the characters realized that everything around her was her. And it's like, that's writing a book. Like, no matter what, it's you. And I think that the textures and the feelings and the inertia or the force or like whatever's going on, if that's from someplace that causes you that emotion, then I mean, that's gonna make your story something that grabs a reader. There was Erin Teagan, who's a writer friend of mine, said I was writing, because she gave me a lot of great feedback on this most recent book, and then we went back and forth, and I was revising it like the last time, and I wrote to her and I was like, Erin, I fixed the thing, and I know I did because I'm like crying. And I was like, on this one relationship and this one piece of closure that they needed inside the story, and it was a hard thing to do, and I didn't want to do it. And then I realized that's why I had to do it, and I was writing it and I was crying, and I don't know if it's going to make other people cry, but I know that for me, this dynamic was personal enough that it elicited tears from me just putting it down on paper. And that's how I know that it's going to read authentic, because it really, really is. So I think that even though yeah, I do hesitate, I didn't want to. And then, but just like Ally's book, you go through it, you walk through it, you make a communion with it. And that's when you get the good stuff on the other side. So yeah. So yes, and yes.
Yes, and yes, and yes. Yeah, I think that's talking about emotion and being able to just put down words on a page that somehow are able to evoke an emotion in a reader was something that I thought would be the hardest thing to do in writing. And I didn't really think I could ever do it. So I kind of I wrote a bunch of manuscripts before I finally got to the one that I sold, and that was like the manuscript. And they weren't touching on those really personal things, and they weren't evoking emotions. And I don't know that I was afraid to go there as much as I was just afraid that I wasn't a good enough writer to be able to actually evoke the emotions. And so when I finally got to the story, my first book, Skeleton Tree, which started out, I totally pants it. I love discovery writing, and it starts out as like a fun story about someone discovering a finger bone in their backyard, and it grows into this skeleton. And then it ended up in this really emotional place that I didn't expect. And so that journey was like, I went on that journey right along with the reader. Like, none of it was planned out. And I was just like, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and try to do this. And I don't know if it's going to work for anybody else besides me, but let me do it. And then that was the first book that just people responded to. And that's how I found my agent, my first editor, and all of that. So after that, I was like, okay, let's do this. Like, I feel like I broke through some barriers. So I have this ability now to like touch people's emotions. So like, yes, if there's something I can find deep down, I'm going to write about it. And I also feel like sometimes we have these stories that we each like keep coming back to. I know I find that with myself because I keep coming back to, like, so many of my books are about like death personified, like this image of the Grim Reaper, like all of these different, the ways that we see the figure of death and like all of that. And even my first book that I ever wrote in 6th grade, which was a picture book that we had to write and illustrate, I found it. And it was like this tragic tale about these 5 adults that start a club to deal with their grief. And it had this really tragic ending. And I was just like pouring it all out there. But like clearly, like when I was 12, like I desperately needed some better way to understand like the most scary thing that any of us face. And so I wrote this story about it. And it just keeps coming back. And I keep writing different stories about it, right? So I think we all kind of have those deeper things that just keep coming up in our work. And it's okay. Like for a while, I was like, no, I have to write a totally different story because I already wrote that story. And I realized, no, it's like that some of those themes are like so deep that you can never write that story, right? Like you just keep touching on it again and again and like bringing out more aspects of it. So don't shy away from that, I would say. Let's see who hasn't. Ally, you haven't told us our star.
I mean, yes, obviously, I put personal things in stories. I'm also, aside from the witch book, which also is very personal because it is about sisterhood, and I have 2 siblings. And I'm also writing a book about dolls, and that's about grief, since I recently lost my father. I think the thing is that, I think a lot of writers are reluctant because it's like, oh, it's too personal. I need to write something universal. But the fact is, writing personal stories are universal stories, because storytelling is basically just a giant, like, empathy blob. You put out your feelings and you put them in a book and you're like, hey, has anyone experienced anything like this or ever felt this way ever? And someone on the other side of the world is like, yes, I know that feeling. I'm with you. And then you human a little better. You're better at being a human with each other because you understand that we're all there. And I think what makes horror so ripe for writing such personal, cathartic, traumatic, grief managing, what is death moments, is because it doesn't shy away from any of that. Like that, it's upfront about all of it. And I think the thing I love so much about middle grade horror too is that it trusts that kids need to hear this. Like it trusts that a kid is ready to hear it. Like Kim, when you were writing that story, it's because you weren't finding answers out in the world around you. You weren't finding those answers in other books. People weren't talking about it. So you sat down and tried to sort out what death means to you. And like everyone has to do that at some point. And I just think we could do a much better job if we give them stories where it's right there. It's on the page. It's what you deal with. You face death, or you learn what grief is and how it fluctuates and what it means. And let's be honest, like if it's all about empathy, who do you root for more than the person in a horror story? Like, come on, you want them to get through it more than anybody. So I think it's just a really great vehicle. And I think that, I think that all writers are very connected to their feelings, but I think from my personal experience with reading, people who write horror do not pull any punches with their feelings. And I think that is great.
Yep. I love it. We love her. I love this comment from yet another Ally. That's the sign of good writing. The personal becomes universal. Awesome.
Like that.
Yeah. And reminder, we are taking your questions in the chat and we're kind of winding down on our time here. So if you have any last burning questions, definitely get those in. Absolutely. But I wanted to ask you had a cool line in here, a little off topic, but definitely on the horror topic. You say a ghost was a question that remained unanswered. So I like that definition of a ghost. So tell us more about how you feel about ghosts and like including them in writing. You have Ghost Girl. Now we have this haunted house book.
I mean, I think there's a very good chance that I got that idea from Shirley Jackson. I feel pretty strongly that you could probably say that about like a large number of opinions that I have when it comes to horror, that I probably just got that from Shirley Jackson. But I think for me, and in that section when they say like what did I say? A ghost is what? I already forgot.
You said a ghost was a question that remained unanswered.
Yes, a question that remained unanswered. So the other section, the other part of that, Jack talks about how people aren't really afraid of ghosts. They're afraid of what the ghost represents. And I think that has always kind of been my opinion on the metaphor of the ghost. That's what it exists for. It is something that it is a question you haven't answered. It is something you haven't faced. It is a representation. It is not its own entity. It almost like it represents a void. It represents the unknown. Like, yes, the unknown, like what happens when we die, but like also the unknown of like all the choices that you didn't make in life, you know, like what those are also all ghosts. Like, what would it have been if the choices had been different and the experience had been different and you lived in a different place or married someone different? Like, I think all of those unanswered questions and all of those unknowable things, we just like to kind of shoehorn into ghost stories because ghosts are just really good to fill with kind of whatever you want. That's kind of their nature.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of ghosts as just reflections of us or like our way of trying to give meaning to the past. So we always want to take tragic stories and now like tell them again in a way that gives them some kind of purpose because they're still here. And now they're, you know, maybe we're hearing their injustices and whatnot. So that's really interesting. But we have a question about a particular entity, the Mourner. No spoilers, though. Did you always know who the Mourner was, or did you discover it along the way?
Okay, no spoilers. I discovered it along the way, which kind of surprises me because when I figured out who the Mourner was, I was like, "Oh, you idiot!" Like, how was? And I'm a little embarrassed admitting this, but you know, I'm dumb, so that's what happened. But yeah, no, I had been having a conversation with a friend of mine, Julia, who is really, really knowledgeable about like Irish folklore. And she was telling me like the deep story behind what a banshee is. And it was really fascinating. And I just kind of like hung on to that. And I was like, wouldn't it be amazing if like in the house, if there's a constant looming threat and that threat is screaming all of the time? You know, just like absolutely wailing. And then I named her the Mourner, and then I still hadn't figured it out. And then I eventually did, and I was like, oh, you absolute dum-dum. So, yes, discovered it along the way.
Is that not like the actual, like, because that is the best writing moment in the world, though, isn't it? Yes, like when like you like, and that's why I think sometimes it's hard to do, you know, your proposal, your outline, whatever, because it's like you make those discoveries and it's like blammo.
Yeah, like I wouldn't have thought of that writing an outline. I've been like, the Mourner is going to be revealed as blah. Like I wouldn't have done that because I had to write the whole book to get to that moment of the reveal. And then I was like, oh. And I love also because I like when my brain tricks me a little bit. You know, I like that there's something running in the background. You know, there's like just something still going when I'm like, I have no ideas. Like something is still moving back there. We hope. But yeah, it's nice when you get surprised. And this is why I also I'm like, okay, I can't plot because I can't surprise myself if I plot.
Yep. So. Thank you for saying that because I so agree. Whatever part of my brain makes an outline is not as smart as the part of my brain that writes the actual story.
Yep.
I love that. I feel like it goes back to like Stephen. I was rereading On Writing by Stephen King recently, and he talks about it's basically you just showing up there in the chair every day, and eventually, if you keep doing that, that muse will sort of like step in. I feel like that's when you're actually writing is when you have access to this sort of like higher level that you don't even realize is there. So that's why like you knew the answer to the question, but you didn't until you wrote it. But it's somewhere in that really like higher part of your brain that outlines cannot access. An outline is, oh, come on.
Also, I don't feel like my other thing with outlining is like, if I'm going to outline a story that's going to seem convincing, I have to really know who my characters are. And when I start a story, I don't know who they are. I have to wait and see what they do. I have to wait and see. And I know that sounds so like ridiculously writerly, like I'm embarrassed that I just said it, But like, I do. Like, you see what choices you put in front of them and then what choices they make. And that's why I wind up rewriting things. And I'm like, no, that was much too smart for you to do the right thing. You're going to do the wrong thing because you're 12 and you don't know what you're doing. And that's fine because you're 12. So you're allowed to not know.
Exactly. I love it. Okay, well, let's do a final burning question. And let me turn it over to Lorien Lawrence. Final burning question.
This is a silly one, if that's okay. Favorite monster, like what would you want to transform into? Because you've mentioned, I mean, you've got ghosts going on, you've got banshees, you mentioned very quickly something about dolls, which I'm very interested in, and witches. So, like, big picture, which is your favorite? Not your favorite book that you're writing, because that's not, but like, yeah.
In general.
Yes.
Favorite monster?
Yep. And which one would you want to be?
Oh, I feel like, okay, so part of me wants to say like a siren because I'm like, that's fun. You're just like,
I just watched that episode of
to their
What
death.
We Do in the Shadows with the Siren. Do you watch that?
I do, but I haven't seen it yet.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
But also, like, I fear the ocean because it's full of monsters and their poop. So I don't like to go in there. So I'm going to like back away from the siren thing. They spend most of their time on the rocks though. So I might be okay. But I feel like any kind of, I'm going to go with dragon. I want to fly. I want to fly and I want to breathe fire. I want to burn villages. I want to razz whole kingdoms. I'm going with dragon. That's it. I went big. Go big or go home. I'm a dragon now.
I love that. Okay, well now, Lorien and Erin, you have to tell us though, which like creature would you be?
I always lean towards vampire, but I think witch. Witch.
Oh yeah.
You know, witch is not a monster, so I always hesitate saying that. So if witches are off the table, then I'll go vampire.
Yeah, if witches are on the table, I want to do witch.
Okay, we can put witches on the table.
Okay, I'm changing my answer. I'm a witch.
You're like taking this very seriously. I appreciate it.
I know, witches are good. I mean, to be fair, this was about dragons. We're like, yes, solid, flying and fire. You could be a fire-breathing witch, though.
There we go. I can still fly as a witch, too. Maybe I'll just be one that transforms into a dragon, and I have the best of both worlds.
Yes.
Or like my familiar's a dragon, and now that's my best buddy.
Yes.
Oh, it all works out. All right, Erin, you're up.
Oh God. Like
Madam President, come on.
Like something like, because you talked about like monsters and their poop. I think that like it might be possibly like really cool to be like a kraken, like to be like an actual sea monster. You know what I mean? Because like if you are the worst thing in the world, then like no one's gonna mess with you. You are like the biggest, baddest monster in the sea, and like you would have like the whole earthly ocean to explore, and I think that would be kind of cool too.
Also true. I'm into this kraken idea.
I don't know if I would like because I don't think there are like kraken pods, but maybe there are. But I mean, like, I guess, but being a kraken would be fun.
We have a resident kraken expert here in the room. Let's just say there are pods.
Are there kraken pods?
Yes, kraken pods, absolutely. Sorry, I spaced out. Of course, I'm the kraken expert. Yes, it is a pod. Yeah. Okay, I love it. I mean, I would definitely want to fly, of course. Witches are super cool. Okay, I don't know why, like, my first thought is that I'm gonna be like Death with a capital D. Why do I say this? I don't know. Death was pretty cool. The new Sandman. The Sandman would also be like a cool thing to be. I could be Lord of Dreams or something. Yeah, but you know, I feel like I would be like a really cool Grim Reaper that would just be like super nice and helpful and like bring meaning and purpose to everyone's life. Don't worry, I'd be just like the one in the new Sandman.
I love it.
Yes. Okay, let's see. And Erin, the really final burning question.
Oh, okay. So this is kind of along the same lines of Lorien's, actually, because you mentioned Shirley Jackson a couple of times. And so maybe this is the answer, but like, what's out of all the things you've ever watched or read or anything, because you've done this beautiful haunted house story, what's the haunted house of your own heart, from like your favorite haunted house? And because whatever you suggest, I'm going to either rent it or buy the book.
Okay, that's hard. There have been so many good, like, haunted houses. I mean, all right, I'm gonna go. I feel like the solid answer would be The Haunting of Hill House, the Shirley Jackson book, but I'm not gonna go with that. I'm actually gonna go with the Haunting of Hill House TV show, which is a very contentious choice. And I know I have friends on all forms of horror that will argue that that TV show was phenomenal or that it was absolute garbage. I happened to really, really love it. And I feel like the way, I'm blanking on his name. What's his name? Who's the guy that made that?
Oh.
Flanagan. I literally call myself a Flana fan, and I just forgot the man's name. I'm out of the club. I'm getting kicked out. I really feel like what he did by making that story a family story completely changed the dynamics in a way that it was so much more emotionally resonant. And I also think it's completely terrifying. And I watched it at least one time while I was writing Disappearing House, because I was like, this is the emotional plus horror element. I want to do this, but like just for kids, you know, like little less terrifying, maybe smaller body count, you know, whatever. But yeah, I would say the Haunting of the Hill House, the Mike Flanagan show, I absolutely adored it, and I will literally fight anyone about it.
Okay, I love it. Awesome. Well, reminder, everyone out there listening, if you have one final burning question, absolutely, this moment is the perfect time to get it in there. But Lorien, do you have a either spooky book or movie recommendation or something that you're liking right now?
This is so random because I usually just watch adult things. But I just was watching this with my son. The reboot of Are You Afraid of the Dark? In like my middle grade horror lovers, it is like pitch perfect, like in terms of all of those, you know, internal, external conflicts, those scares. My son is going to be 6, so he might seem young to some people to watch that, but he loves it, and we are bonding over it. So I definitely recommend that show, and there's 3 seasons now, and they're all really, really different. Like the first one has like a circus theme, the second one is like a lighthouse shadow monster thing, and then this one is a haunted island resort hotel thing. So that's
sold.
Kind of what I watch. Yeah, it's fun. I think it gets it right for that age group.
Nice. It's making me think of like American Horror Story for kids, but I hope the writing's like makes more sense.
Like, you know, take it down a million notches.
Awesome. I love it. All right, Erin, we got to put you on the spot too. Scary thing that you would recommend.
Scary things that I recommend. Okay, so I just did a rewatch of I'm just thinking about TV now. We're talking about let's go TV. I just did a rewatch of the Netflix Fear Street, the like Fear Street 1994 / 1978 / 1666. And I enjoyed the heck out of it. I mean, I really I loved it last year. And then I was like, was I just in a Halloween mood last year? Does it hold? And I loved it again. So I think that for specific, really, I feel like there's something for everybody in there just because of, I mean, if you grew up in 1994, boy, that soundtrack really.
That first 10 minutes of the 90s one. Yeah, that first 10 minutes.
The Dalton? There's a whole
everything in that scene. I just watched that. I'm
my gosh, I'm
outing myself in this, but I will watch that over and over again.
I love it. Yeah, so at the moment, that's something that I just thoroughly enjoyed and will recommend.
All right, I love it. Well, I mean, I was a 90s baby, of course, 90s teenager, so I'm gonna do that. Yeah, you know, for me, I'm thinking about like the most recent haunted house thing I did. I guess it was like the American and the British version of Ghosts, which is, of course, a comedy. So it's a totally different take on the haunted house, where the ghosts are like super amazing and friendly, and they all have all these kind of like hijinks and things happening. But I really like that take because I'm kind of jaded, I guess, like as a scary movie or show watcher. It's hard for me to find something that's like fresh that I get excited about. But like that was for me, like I haven't watched a lot of comedies and they both had kind of different feels. So I'd recommend both the American and the British versions of Ghosts here. That's really fun.
That's awesome. I think I love horror comedy, and I think it's so hard to pull off. Like, just you have to elicit two reactions. Like horror, you just have to scare people. Comedy, you just have to make them laugh. You do a horror comedy, you got to do both. Like it is next level storytelling. Like stuff like What We Do in the Shadows is just
I love
perfection.
It.
Perfection. So I'm gonna check out. I heard Ghost was really good, so
yeah,
it's been on my list for a bit. I just got to go to this day job apparently. So you know.
Oh geez, yeah, it's really good. What We Do in the Shadows, so much fun. I'm just like I'm waiting so that I can make my doll look exactly like me and like come to life, because that's going to be perfect. I have my little doll version of me, just like in the show. That's happening soon, so wait for that. But anyway, well, a huge shout out to everyone who joined us tonight and posted questions. Thanks so much for stopping by. And a reminder, if you go down to the description, there is a link for how you can get a signed copy of This Appearing House from Books Are Magic. And they do ship all around the US. So go head on down there and you can get a signed copy, which is super cool. And thanks to Erin, Lorien, and especially Ally, we're all in your fan club now, for joining us tonight.
Thank you guys. This was so much fun. I absolutely, you're all the best. And I really, you made launch day just wonderful. So thank you.
Yay! And I got to break out my skeleton hands. I'm always happy about that. But I'm going to play us out with a little teaser for another cool interview that we're going to do coming up soon. And this one is actually with our very own Erin Petti, who's here tonight. So definitely join us for that one. And just another huge thank you to everyone who joined tonight. Good night, everyone.